The Kharkiv front in the Russia-Ukraine war is continuing to collapse. It's continuing to move further and further to the south. Ukraine continues to have more and more difficult stemming the tide. And as we're discovering, this whole issue of corruption, which has been mentioned in regards to Ukraine, a lot of times has kind of been sort of an asterisk on the side. But now we're discovering how it has direct graphic applications on the front line. Meanwhile, Russia is saying, even amidst all of its advances in both the east and now in the north, they're still willing to negotiate an end to this. And adding to all the problems, you have more confusion coming out of Washington and among the so-called elite of our country who don't seem to know what they're doing, don't have a plan for how to accomplish whatever it is they're trying to do. And it just creates this big mess that, again, the Ukraine people are the big bill payers for this. Let's jump right into it today. First of all, let me show you this map here. This is, again, from the Institute for the Study of War, which shows the front line here. And by the way, I do want to make a comment today because some of our astute viewers have noticed when I used that Institute for the Study of War, they're aware of who runs that, Jack Keane, which is somebody that I often bring up here as an example of what not to do and how he's advocating things that make no sense for our country and are unsolvable and, not good operations to even accomplish, not anything good to even shoot at here. So you may wonder, then why are you using his map? Well, as it turns out, like in so many different ways, some parts of his organization, the ISW, is actually quite good. And these maps, it's not a matter of a personal opinion or something. They have interpretations of events on the map, which I frequently don't agree with, but some of their analysis is actually quite good. And because there is so many different mapping or groups out there, like Military Summary Channel, which I put up here, or Weeb Union, or Alex from History Legends, you can't hide what's really going on in the ground. So I use that ISW map, and you'll see me doing that because what it does is show an accurate representation of what's on the ground. And then I'm going to give you what I perceive and believe to be the accurate interpretation. And that's where we are here. So Gary, if you could throw that map back up there. So what this shows right here, this shows that the expanse of the Russian assault here is becoming more and more effective. And so now then, in between there, as of today, there's actually more Russian advances. They'll probably have another green circle on there indicating where the action's going on in the middle of that sector. So there's roughly a 45-kilometer wide front, and in some places up to 10 kilometers deep. And that's just in, 4 days? I think this might be the 5th day since they began this offensive. And just to kind of put that in context, it took the Ukraine side in their 2023 offensive about, I want to say, a month and a half to get to this same depth that the Ukraine side did, and they never went beyond that. And by the way, they also, the Ukraine side suffered egregious numbers of casualties to try to get that far. Russia has gotten in 5 days, actually about 3 days, as far as it took Ukraine to get a month and a half. And they, like I say, they never went beyond that. And there are very good reasons why both of those things happened, both in 2023 and what's happening now. And we're going to get into some of that right here. But one of the things I want to point out, and our friend Alex from History Legends, who himself put out a video on this today. And by the way, in a minute, I'm going to show you a bit of that and definitely recommend you go watch the whole video. I'm just going to show you a very small portion of it. But one of the things that is coming out of this, not just in his video, but multiple sources here, is that most of these Russian troops that have been conducting this have some of the least amount of experience of many of the troops. And you watch Alex's video, and he explains how he can determine that. But these guys don't have a lot of experience, and yet they're still having significant combat success on the front, which kind of gets into the point of what was Russia's real attempt here. So it doesn't seem to me, by the way, that Russia expected to have a lot of success here, and that I don't see any evidence that they're actually planning on attacking the city of Kharkiv yet, at least not at this time. So it could be that they had secondary objectives beyond where the actual point of infiltration is coming. And I think that probably what we're going to discover over time is that Russia wanted to draw reserves away from elsewhere so that maybe they could put more troops there as well. There still remains troops in the northern part beyond that have still not gone into action yet. And as Alex shows in here just a second, a relatively small number of Russian forces have actually been involved so far. To get this 45 kilometer by 10 kilometer deep penetration has been a relatively small number of troops. Now, this is not as surprising as it may appear. Business Insider published this article. Gary, if you can throw that headline up there. Oh, wrong one. Yeah, there we go. This one is from actually March, as you'll notice. It's March 7th. Ukraine was being accused by the Ukrainians. I'm talking about the Ukraine government was being accused of not building the defensive systems that it needed. And you've heard us talk on this channel for months that while Russia spent upwards of half a year and more, and in some cases building an elaborate and very well fortified series of defenses into which the Ukraine broke its teeth in 2023, the Ukraine side refused to go on the defensive. Even when Zelensky, their former commander on the ground, recommended that Zelensky move to a defensive position in late 2023 to start defensive positions, they didn't want to do that because it wouldn't look good, so he says. But finally, they did belatedly start toward the end of the year. And I believe in December, they finally started building a lot of these defensive positions. Well, by March, if you can put that headline back up there again, Gary, you can see that there was some confusion and some complaints that, hey, why are you building this defensive systems better in the Kharkiv region? And I'm going to show you that in just a second. Ago, an amazing piece of work that I found online here recently. They were saying, how come the front lines aren't getting them? We're talking about in the Donbass area. But even that wasn't very good there. And this shows you why there is real trouble across the whole war for the Ukraine side. Here now is Alex explaining what's gone on up to this point and what he thinks is the Russian objective.
But like this Ukrainian soldier told the BBC, the Russians managed to push through because there were not even any minefields to stop them. Meanwhile, there were still Ukrainian defenses composed of small trenches hidden in the dense greenery here, here, and here. For now, the Russian detachment simply bypassed them. But if they want to truly consolidate their breachheads, they will need the reinforcements of the second wave to clear all these positions. Once again, this seems to confirm the theory that we're probably witnessing a reconnaissance in force by the Russian 72nd Motorized Rifle Division to test enemy defenses and its ability to transfer reinforcements. Now, if the main objective of the Russian army was to divert as many troops from the Eastern Front up to the north, then it's mission accomplished. This limited-scale offensive is already hurting rotations all along the Donetsk front. Now imagine if they slap Kharkiv with a girthy one. Day 4. To repulse Russian forces, Ukraine reportedly transferred additional units of the 60th and 63rd Mechanized Brigade plus artillery units of the 45th Brigade from the Liman sector northwards towards Kharkiv and Sumy. All this because of the infiltration of a couple Russian detachments with no combat experience.
And just to show why that's so important. So I suspect evidence is starting to pile up here that Russia probably thought that they would come into a decent amount of resistance, but that it would cause Ukraine to have to redeploy reserves elsewhere. So as far as that goes, that's probably what they expected, and now what's going to happen. But now it looks like Russia has had more success than they expected, and now they have an opportunity to really put even more pressure on Ukraine than they thought. The reason I say that is because if you really wanted to push in somewhere, you're going to lead with your good troops. Or troops that at least have a decent amount of training, and then you would bring in your even more armed troops and more seasoned troops in right behind that. So, like I used to be in a cavalry unit when I was on active duty, and when I fought in an armored battle in 1991. I was with the reconnaissance unit. So you would send in a reconnaissance in force, and you'd want it to be a really good, well-trained unit so that you'd go in and you would probe the enemy, find out where their defenses are strong, find out where they're weak, and then you can say, all right, we have decisively engaged here. We're not engaging here. And then you tell the other commands over your shoulder, this is where you need to come. And then they would change that. And then you'd bring in the heavy armor. In our case, it was the 1st and 3rd Armored Divisions. in Desert Storm, First Infantry Division and First Armored Division, so that they could then come in and clean up when we identified and made breaches. So that's the role of the first unit there. So Russia didn't send in their best reconnaissance units. They sent in one of fairly low quality, but all of a sudden they crossed the line and find out, wait, where's the defenses? Because all the reports have been that since March, actually since December of last year, that's been going on. Now, let me show you something here that really underscores that possibly Zelensky might not have even known that. Forgive me here just a second. Zelensky may not have even known himself. Oh, wrong one. No, that's the right one. So now again, look again. This is from March 10th of this year. And the UK Defense Ministry has said Ukraine is increasing its fortifications along the line. Then you go read down deeper in the story here, and you see that during a press conference in December of 23, President Zelensky replied to a question about fortifications posed by a Kiev independent journalist, saying that the most powerful defenses had been constructed in Ukraine's northeastern Kharkiv Oblast. When I see this, there is when I see this there, but not another oblast, I ask concrete questions of our military leaders in sectors. Is this sufficient? Why is it weaker here than in the Kharkiv Oblast? So you see that to Zelensky, he thought they had really good these defenses in the Kharkiv Oblast. He thought that those were strong. Probably Russia did too. And I bet that Zelensky was just as surprised as Putin was that there was none. And I've seen some of your comments here in the comment section already that you've seen some of the same things I have. There's some photographic evidence that some of these alleged defensive positions that were supposed to have been built by money that the United States and Western Europe had given Ukraine were piled up in big batches out in the middle of nowhere instead of being built. They literally weren't built at all. Not just built poorly, they weren't built at all. And as you can see on the screen right there that Gary's showing here, these are some of the videos that were made back in that same time frame in the March, April of this year, where Zelensky was on tour and seeing all these images of these great defenses being built. And this was supposed to give everybody confidence that if Russia did invade in a new front, they were going to be ready, etc. And yet it was almost all fiction. In the places where they had the cameras, things were probably dug well, but now then we're finding out that they're not elsewhere. So now Ukraine is in a huge dilemma because they don't have enough defenses in the front area, in the Donetsk area, as I've told you many times here. Now we know they also don't have them in the northern part. So what does Ukraine do? Do they pull reserves away from the eastern front and move them up to the north to try to stop that one, thereby further weakening the center where they're already falling back because of Russian onslaughts? Or do they just say, hey, you guys are on your own up there. You're going to have to hold on, and we're going to keep our troops back down here. And there's, I know, discussion within the highest ranks of the Ukrainian side that they're trying to decide which is the right one. And all of this goes to underscore, again, the same thing we keep talking about. It's men, not money. Ukraine has a manpower issue. And when you take a look at all those things, you see that they don't have enough troops to send to both places. They don't have an operational theater level reserve. But most nations, when you're fighting, you want to have a large reserve that's not engaged, so that if there's either a penetration, if you're on defense, that you have a large formation that you can go to try to cut that off and to deal the enemy a blow and to send them back to the fight. Or if you're on the offense, if you have an opening there, then you want to be able to drive into it. Russia has it. Russia has operational reserves. We know that they do. And actually, this is one of them, not just one. This one in the whole north is one of the relatively recently created reserves. And now they're planning here. There's additional reports out today. Actually, it has been for the last couple of days that in the Sumy area, a little bit to the east of the Kharkiv area, that there's another grouping of Russian forces and that there may be yet another penetration coming soon. And if they have the same issue with the absence of border fortifications, this could get real dicey real quick for the Ukraine side here. Now, that's the condition that's going on here. So as you know, the things keep going on south in the Avdiivka area, in the Zaporozhye area, where Russia is making the additional progress. In the Chasiv Yar area, they're continuing to make methodical progress. It's not huge jumps as it was it's a number of weeks ago, but it's still continuing to go on there. Now, if Ukraine has to withdraw some of their forces that are holding back the Russians there, especially in the Kupiansk area in the northern part of the Eastern Front, then the whole thing is going to be at risk of turning quite shaky. Now, anyone who was just being rational and unemotional about this would start saying, okay, we really do need to start trying to find a negotiated settlement here, because this is just not looking good. Things are starting to go south. And if we don't make a negotiated settlement soon, it's entirely possible that there could be a break somewhere in the Ukrainian lines, whether that's in Sumy, Kharkiv, Kupiansk area, the Bakhmut area, which is another offensive area for the Russians, the Avdiivka area, or elsewhere in the Zaporozhye. You see, there is all kinds of places where the Russians are putting pressure, and they still have reserves to put in if they find a break somewhere. But instead, it's like we're still dealing in this fantasy world where the reality doesn't exist. And there's mixed signals coming in out of some of the elite in Washington, which is no surprise, but we're going to show it to you because this is where we are right now. Blinken is in, before I get to the Blinken part, I want to show you the Petraeus, because I often put him up here and stuff that he says to say, he's just, blind to reality. Remember prior to the 2023 offensive, when he was just so emphatic about how the Ukraine side was going to win, they were going to succeed, the Russian defense was going to break and crumble and all that stuff. And then it was complete nonsense. Well, in recent days, he's actually been saying something that makes a lot of sense. And it makes me wonder if you're seeing a shift that's going to at least start in the United States. So first of all, here he was at a recent forum talking about, I'll just let him speak for himself on the first one. Go ahead and roll that.
This is a dangerous period because of the delay. There are two major factors here. First was the delay in the House of Representatives for nearly 6 months to approve the U.S. assistance. So it's also difficult, though, because Ukraine took a long time to sort out its conscription law.
Yeah.
The two wars that I was privileged to command, the average age of a soldier on the front line is roughly 19 to 22. In Ukraine, it's over 40.
Okay, so the first part of that, I think he's already trying to play the talking points of many in the elite that they're already got their exit plan stretch, and that is, the reason this failed is because of the House of Representatives. It was Congress that failed, and if only they had done this earlier, then we wouldn't be in this position now. I'll tell you, first of all, so I guess Petraeus does deserve a little bit of criticism here, but you're going to hear this from a lot of people, not just from Petraeus. And let me make sure you're aware right now, that is nonsense. Because if the House of Representatives and the Senate and then the president signed this bill in September of last year, when Biden first asked for it, like days later, it wouldn't make any difference. Because as Petraeus said in the second half of that clip, it's a manpower issue. So he says, they delayed in having this bill passed. Well, it's not just that the parliament in Ukraine was dragging their feet about having a mobilization law. It's because they're trying to figure out how to do it that's not going to drive people out of the country, which is happening as it turns out. But they recognize that the people don't want to be fighting a losing war, and they're trying to figure out how to make it palatable. But they recognize that they can't keep fighting without it, because right now Ukraine is on a net negative every single month. They lose more in casualties, killed and wounded, than they are getting through forced mobilization. So their army is continuing to shrink. Ergo, they can't form new units. They don't have the ability to have enough people and then to have the time to train them out of contact so that they can bring them back in. They have to throw them right away into the front to keep the thing from crumbling. And you see that when you do that, you don't have a chance to train them. And almost the only thing they can do is just die slowly, because they can't even possibly do any kind of offensive operations. That's what's going on now. Petraeus then continued on like this.
There's a real threat right now to Kharkiv, the second largest city, which is sort of in the east. But from the north of Kharkiv, the Russians have been pushing in. And if they get to artillery range of Kharkiv, the Russians will just obliterate that city. They have no qualms anymore.
What is artillery range, just to give a
Well,
rough...
you did just, again, 20-ish kilometers, but keep in mind the guns are a little bit behind the lines. It depends what caliber they are, 122 or 152. But again, they're approaching that. They may be 10, 15 kilometers from that position. I think the Ukrainians certainly can keep them out of Kharkiv, but at some point they're going to have to push them back as they did before. In the first year of the war, they have to get them out of artillery. It's bad enough that the Russians are now using something called glide bombs, which they can loft 40 kilometers in Russian airspace, where our systems aren't reportedly being used.
Gary, can you throw that ISW map back up there again? Because I wanted so you can see what he's talking about. He is correct in part of what he says again, where he says, look, the Ukraine side is getting into they're concerned about Russia getting into artillery range. And basically that little dotted line you see around Kharkiv in the south, the lower left-hand corner of the map there, you see that if the Russia gets into that, then they're within regular tube artillery of Kharkiv city as it is. Now, our Kharkiv been hitting a lot over the last months, actually, from Russia in their energy infrastructure with hypersonic missiles and other kinds of drones and hitting their energy infrastructure, which has already rendered the city very vulnerable. If those penetrations that I showed you up there continue to move further to the south and they get inside that dashed line you saw on the map there, then the Ukraine side is going to be in real trouble. Petraeus then makes the comment, well, they're going to have to push them back like they did in 2022. Now, if you're not familiar with that, what he's referring to is in the fall of 2022, Ukraine had what is almost certainly going to be their sole huge success in the entire war when they caught Russia with their pants down and Russia made some foolish decisions in the north in terms of their manning, and they left some barely trained border patrol, border post people and a small number of them in the entire northern section in the Kharkiv area while they were focusing in the Donbass and down in the Zaporizhia area. And Ukraine took advantage of that and formed a force really without anyone knowing about it. It was really quite impressive how they did it. And they drove Russia out of there. It cost them a lot, but they were very successful and drove Russia out of that whole area, to include Vovchansk, in the area where that one of those battles is taking place north of Kharkiv right now. But that's only because Russia had no formations. They had a handful of troops, like 5,000 by some reports, no defensive positions built whatsoever, and they got caught completely by surprise. That is no longer the case. They now have hundreds of thousands of troops in the area there, and they've got somewhere between 50 and 70,000 north of the border that's now starting to engage there. And by all accounts, it's they haven't even brought the main force that they had, so they still can push further. It's entirely possible that they do get to within artillery range of Kharkiv city and continue to build that buffer area, which I've talked about before in the north, so that they get Belgorod, their southern city that Ukraine has been shelling a lot lately, out of range of the Ukrainian artillery. So it's really moving Belgorod, which is in artillery range, out of range, so that the Ukraine side, their city, is in artillery range. So Russia's just trying to move it south and change the dynamics on that in that particular area there, but it's having this big impact in that it's, of course, exposing the manpower shortage throughout the entire front of the Ukraine side. Now, Petraeus had one other thing to say that's kind of noteworthy, and let me run that one.
The objective reality here is that they are fighting for their survival against a country that has more than 3 times the population and more than 10 times the economy and is seemingly unconcerned by casualties. And that's a difficult situation.
So here's the part that makes me scratch my head when I hear him say that, because in many of the things, at least portion of all 3 of those clips I just showed you, Petraeus is basically making my case that I've been making for months here. Manpower is an issue. The glide bombs are an issue. Ukraine has no answer for any of them. And now then you see that, look, there's just no path to turning this thing around, and that you can't just push Russia back, because now you don't have the troops. You don't have the troops like you did in 2022. So if you can't do that, if you can't change the dynamics in the air, and you can't change the manpower dynamics, then it seems like it would be time to find a negotiated settlement. But instead, he just makes this comment that, well, they're fighting for their lives, so they got to keep going on. But look, we are now well past the time when this should have already happened, but it is critical right now that, because those dynamics exist, Now is the absolute urgent time to seek a negotiated settlement, because they are fighting for their lives and they're losing that battle. If you care about Ukraine, if you really care about the people of Ukraine, about their freedom, about all the things that they can have, it's time to seek a negotiated settlement. Because if in the name of, well, we don't want Russia to win and we don't want to accept the loss of some territory, then what you do is you condemn Ukraine to lose yet more territory and more men to be pointlessly sacrificed to death. And as I know you've heard me say this many times, but it just grieves me to see us making such foolish, futile decisions that can't succeed. And we see they aren't succeeding, and we still keep trying them. My frustration was added yet another level today because Secretary of State Anthony Blinken is in Kiev, and he seems to be still going on with the fiction. Apparently he didn't get Petraeus' memo. Here's one of the things he said.
We have not encouraged or enabled strikes outside of Ukraine, but ultimately, Ukraine has to make decisions for itself about how it's going to conduct this war. We will continue to back Ukraine with the equipment that it needs to succeed.
Okay, well, that's a lie. You're not going to give them the equipment that they need to succeed because you can't. That's not on the table. That's not even a play you can make. So let's just get that fiction out of the way right now. But to say we're not going to call the shots there, we're not going to tell them what to do. We don't have to tell them what to do, but we can say we're not going to continue to give you enough things to give you the fiction that you can succeed when we know you're not going to, and it's going to cost you more. And it's going to cost us more too, because the longer this goes, the stronger Russia gets. There was a time earlier in this war, if we had brought it to a conclusion, then at least two separate occasions in 2022, one actually in late 2021 that could have averted the war entirely. But we had several other opportunities up to this point to where we could have ended the war, which would have left Russia in a weakened position. It would have taken them time to recover in time they would have, because that's just how life works. But they would have been weakened at that point. Now then we're past that point. Now then they're not weakened. Now then they regained all the strength they had before, but it's now much stronger because they have this exposed, the first 2 years exposed their weaknesses and their errors and their tactics and their strategic errors that they had made. They have been burned away through the cruelties of war. Now that they've made corrections, and they're starting to be much more capable, as well as bigger, as well as more well-armed. So we need to stop that right now by ending the war as quickly as we can. And yet, Blinken continued on.
On the Patriot batteries, as I mentioned, we are intensely focused on Patriots and other forms of air defense, and making sure that we can find them, bring them to Ukraine. Kharkiv, of course, is one urgent priority. There are others. All I can tell you is this is something we discussed in detail and that we're actively and urgently working on.
Well, wait, what do you mean you're looking for Patriots? I don't you know where they are? I mean, you understand what's going on behind the scenes there. Obviously, we've got quite a number of Patriot systems. We're not giving them up because we're like, hey, if we get into a war, we're going to need those. Well, guess what? Everybody else who has Patriots also wants to have them, and they don't want to give them up. So when he says I'm looking for them, we're trying to figure it out, meaning we can't find anybody who's willing to give them up right now. So to reinforce, he just claimed that we're giving them everything they need to succeed, and he knows that's a lie. Now he's graphically depicting it by exposing that one of the most crucial things, the air defense capacity and the missile defense capacity, we can't find any. So it almost doesn't matter how many interceptor missiles you have, and there's not that many. You don't have the batteries to use them anyway, and nobody wants to give them up, and we're not going to give them up either. Or he would have just said, we're going to send you 12 of them that we have from these locations here, because we know how hard it is to come by those things and how important they are to our own national defense. Now, again, that should lead you to the conclusion, all right, well, we're going to, behind the scenes, we're going to encourage Zelensky to make a negotiated settlement. We should tell him that, hey, listen, we're just going to give you enough stuff to try and hold the line as best you can here, but there's not going to be enough. There's never going to be enough for you to win. You don't have the troops anyway. So we're going to give you more stuff as long as you seek a negotiated settlement, and then leave it up to him to come out and say that. But it doesn't appear that we're doing that, and it appears we haven't. So I'm going to show you something, first of all, that Kirby said in September of 2023, so quite a long time ago, of saying, who's running the show here? Is it Washington or is it Zelensky?
We all want to see this war end, but it's got to end on terms that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian people can accept. We want to help them succeed on the battlefield so that if and when President Zelensky, and only President Zelensky, can determine when it's time to sit down with President Putin.
No, it's not up to only Zelensky. Why would you want to leave it up to him when he is obviously just blinded by hatred for Russia for very valid and understandable reasons, but he can't make a right decision? So you would think that, like I said, what should be happening while Blinken is on the ground in Kiev right now, he should be telling him what I just told you. But at least according to what we have him saying, he's still where Kirby was.
Finally, in terms of negotiations, these, again, are decisions for Ukraine to make, not the United States or not any other country. So if I imagine that if Putin showed any interest in seriously engaging in negotiations, I'm sure Ukrainians would respond to that. But what Putin is demonstrating every single day is exactly the opposite. But fundamentally, these are questions for Ukraine to answer. We've been very clear. We support Ukraine. We support Ukraine in its decisions, and there will not be, never will be anything about Ukraine without Ukraine.
And so he says, yeah, sure. That, Putin says every day he doesn't want to negotiate. Well, that's a bald-faced lie. It's self-evidently so. We've shown you clips back in February when Tucker Carlson went to Moscow and interviewed Putin. He emphatically said that he wanted to negotiate before the war. He emphatically said that in March and April of 2022, he again tried to seek a negotiated settlement. And then there's also evidence, which I'm going to talk about in a second in a really amazing way. Late in 2022, early 23, there was one last chance for negotiated settlement, and we rejected it. And now today, on that Business Insider that Gary popped up there, he's again saying, hey, we're interested in having a negotiated settlement. That's what he's saying in today's news. He's going to be meeting with Xi Jinping of China, I believe, starting tomorrow. And in I looked on both the media coming out of Russia at the media coming out of China, and they're both saying there's a 4-point plan that they would like to pursue, but they're willing to have a negotiated settlement now, right now, even when they're winning on the battlefield and succeeding in areas where literally the Ukrainian army could start to collapse at any time. It's that fragile right now. And instead of taking that opportunity and keeping his men alive, they're keeping the fiction going here. But you see that, it's just boggles the mind when you have the United States Secretary of State to go on, global television and say, well, Putin just, all he wants to do is fight. He has no interest in, and it's all over the map, the opposite. Everybody sees it. And so you always are hearing these people talk about how we can't, we can't appear to be weak and we can't send the wrong signals. Folks, there is no more wrong signal and no more greatest signal of weakness than this kind of stuff. When you're saying stuff that's self-evidently untrue, when you have Russia, the president of Russia himself saying, I'm ready to negotiate, on the same day he's saying that they're not willing to, and he just went on, global television on the Tucker Carlson show months back saying the same thing emphatically. And you just have to wonder, what in the world is going on here? Why do we keep making these self-inflicted wounds which only harm the Ukraine side? The very people we claim to want to help, our policies are helping to undermine their national security. There is a negotiated settlement to be made right now. And it won't be pretty. Let me just say this, it won't be a nice one. That was available in December, relatively speaking, December 2021. Without the need for any war. It was also available on a relatively good terms in March, April of 2022. Now then the deal is going to be much less good. Now, listen, so I'm going to give you some information here. I had a meeting this morning in Washington, D.C. With a certain diplomatic fellow that I've known for quite a long time. He's a very highly placed diplomat for a big friend of the United States. I won't go any more than that. And I'll tell you his track record of things that he's told me over the years. I've known him for well over a decade. have always been remarkably accurate. So I put a lot of stock in what he says. I'll just tell you that I'm telling you what I was told earlier today. So I don't have firsthand knowledge on this, but again, the source is extraordinary here. So he told me that, first of all, going back to the comment I just made there, that there was negotiated settlement that was available before the war was over. He was telling me that in June of 2021, when Biden and Putin had a summit, that behind the scenes, outside of the cameras, Putin told him straight up, folks, he said, dude, he didn't say dude, sorry, I'm interpreting that part there, but he said, if you continue to push Ukraine or NATO into Ukraine, there's going to be a war. We will use force to stop this. And allegedly that Biden said, hey, do whatever you want. But if you do, we're going to crush you because you can't stand up to our pressure. So don't recommend it. But if that's what you want to do, then do whatever you think right. And we know what happened with that then. And this source claims that by August of that year, so a couple of months later, Putin made the political decision, okay, I guess they're going to go through and do it. And, I put up here in previous shows over the months, Stoltenberg, who admitted openly, so we actually have some corroboration on this, that Putin did say prior to the war that NATO in Ukraine equals war. And he said, we're not willing to do that. We're not willing to listen. So we had a chance to avert war altogether. We threw it away. We said, nope, we're just going to continue on because I think, and this is part of my speculation here because I don't have any direct sources, but evidence suggests that there were many in the United States, and I don't know whether Biden personally was one or his advisors, but that they were okay with going to war with Russia, with Ukraine, because it would weaken Russia. And even though it would devastate parts of their country and kill a lot of their soldiers, if it would harm Russia, who's to say? But here's the problem. I think that Biden actually believed that. And I know Gary's shown many times that clip from 60 Minutes where Biden says, we're the most powerful country in the world. We can do whatever we want to do. Of course, we can handle everything. Well, yeah, that's what you think. But now you see that's not true. You see the painful, horrific evidence on the ground. It's not true. We can't just do whatever we want. There are limits to power. And right now, Ukraine men are paying the price on a daily basis. Ukraine mothers and wives and children who have been deprived of their husbands and fathers and sons because of these actions here. And it's not over yet. It's continuing on. And until we finally come to the point to where we're going to do what makes sense and what's right, that price will continue to pile up. And if it goes far enough, we could, things could spin out of control and then the war could actually expand beyond Ukraine. But the other thing that he told, which is really important, is that Russia wants a negotiated settlement. He said this whole nonsense, which of course I've been telling you for months, that Putin wants to go into Western Europe and into NATO, it's complete nonsense. Not only does he not want to do that, Putin, he doesn't have the capacity to do that. What he does want is a rump state, a buffer between him and NATO. He doesn't want to conquer into NATO territory. He wants a buffer between him and NATO. So he is willing to make a negotiated settlement, but right now it's going to come at the cost of at least those 4 oblasts, all of the Donetsk area, all of the Donbass, which they don't yet have. So even if there's negotiations now, the likelihood is that Putin will actually say, yes, we'll have a negotiated settlement as long as I get all of the Donbass. So if you would cede yet more territory than you already have, a negotiated settlement and an end to the war is possible. And from Putin's perspective, so I'm told, that they want to have troops to go up basically right up to Odessa and in a negotiated settlement, because that way that they have some guarantees that if anybody changes their mind later, that they have enough troops and forces right there where they could just make another penetration and block off the Black Sea coast. That's from their perspective. Now, obviously, from the Ukraine side, they wouldn't like that. But if the alternative, and this is the crucial part, don't miss this, the alternative is if we don't have a negotiated settlement with those kinds of ceding of territory, then apparently, and especially this new defense minister that Putin just hired gives evidence that they are willing to continue fighting for as long as it takes, and they actually mean it. If they had to go another year, 2 years more, and conquer that territory, then they'll do that. They'll either, apparently, evidence suggests that Russia will either gain by negotiated settlement what they consider to be their security, or they'll militarily take it by force. Of course, that comes at a much higher cost. So the choice right now, in all probability, for the Ukraine / the Western side is make a negotiated settlement right now, and you have a chance to stop the damage right now, cauterize the wound, and start the process of healing, start the process of building up to a neutral state. And they'll have their, you can negotiate. They can have their own military. You don't have to literally become just a vassal. You can still have your own ability to have armed forces and have your own national security. You can have economic interactions with anyone you want if it's negotiated well. That's possible. The Russians are open to that. But if you don't take that, if you don't go down that path and you keep with the fiction, then you're almost certainly going to have a much, much worse case later on. And I can't predict anything because there's so many factors that, number one, I don't know, but also in any time in human affairs, people are capable of really suffering a lot worse than you may think until you're under it. So the Ukraine army may not break. They may just continue to slowly give ground and still maintain their viability. That certainly is possible. It's happened in the past. But it's also even more possible that some of the pressure points that I've described to you throughout this video could finally snap and break. And because Russia has operational reserves, if there's a penetration in there, and now because I've shown you both from the Ukrainian sources and from the maps, there are large areas where they don't have defenses. They don't have minefields, and Russia could literally drive into the interior of the country. And when that happens, like what happened to France in 1940, when the Wehrmacht, the German forces, broke through where they weren't supposed to break through, the entire rest of the army collapsed like a series of dominoes. They panicked. They didn't know what to do. And then they were driven off the continent at Dunkirk. That's what could happen. And there's a higher probability, militarily speaking, of that than that there would be a slow attrition and they would continue to maintain their force structures. But either case, all we're doing is increasing the cost to Ukraine because there is no viable path to reversing these things, folks. It's just not going to happen. Every evidence in the world, I keep showing you on every show we have here, it's time to do the right thing, to eat some crow, to recognize there are limits of power and do the right, sane, wise thing now. Seal off this damage and prevent any worse thing from coming in, and show that you have a little bit of humility and a little bit of humanity, that we care about the people that we've been supporting and we don't want any more of them to pay a price. That's what we should do. We're going to continue to watch this as it unfolds, and you can count on us to give you the no kidding real interpretation of events that's going on, things that are obvious and make sense and it's logical, instead of this fiction you get from all these high-priced people and people that are in the government, or like Petraeus, Blinken, some of these others. It's just a bunch of nonsense. You're going to get the truth from us because we're unintimidated and uncompromised. I don't care what anybody thinks about it. And you're going to keep getting that. I am going to be traveling to London, actually starting later tonight. And so I'm not sure where I'll come to you next, but we'll come to you from someplace because we are not going to just take a vacation. We want to make sure you get the information you need. Be sure to like and subscribe, and please do share this with other folks because everybody deserves to know the truth and not just this made for fiction stuff that you get on mainstream media. Thanks, and we'll see you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.
Do the United States need this? What for? Thousands of miles away from your national territory. Don't you have anything better to do? You have issues on the border, issues with migration, issues with the national debt, more than $33 trillion. You have nothing better to do, so you should fight in Ukraine? Wouldn't it be better to negotiate with Russia, make an agreement, already understanding the situation that is developing today?
That's a good one, Gary. We'll see you on the